The final day of Pompeii is an image seared into the collective consciousness of history. It is a haunting tableau, a bustling Roman metropolis, nestled comfortably in the shade of a volcano, suddenly and violently struck down. It was buried in layers of ash and preserved with such astonishing fidelity that, nearly 2,000 years later, we can still tread its very streets. This image is so stark, so utterly compelling, that it has come to eclipse everything else we remember about the city. But it should not. No location, no culture, no community can be holistically understood by its worst moment alone. Tonight, our purpose is to trace the entire arc of Pompeii's existence. We will follow it from its initial settlement, through successive conquests and profound transformations, through alternating eras of war and abundance, and through all the forces that ultimately shaped it into the city it was destined to become. We will witness the cataclysmic eruption not as the city's definitive end, but as a crucial turning point in its long and complex life. We will observe how that life endured in unexpected ways, as the site continued to exert a powerful pull on people, resisting a simple disappearance into oblivion. We will delve into how it gradually faded into the realm of legend, only to be unearthed centuries later, reigniting both human greed and intellectual curiosity, and giving rise to an ongoing struggle to understand and conserve its invaluable remains. But before we embark on this journey, I wish to extend my gratitude to everyone who has been listening, sharing their insights, and patiently awaiting this next story. Assembling this narrative has been a considerable undertaking, and it is my sincere hope that you will find the result to have been worth the wait. Before there was ever a city, there was the mountain. It cast a formidable shadow over a sun-drenched coastal plain in southern Italy. For countless millennia, it had periodically bled fire, blanketing the region of Campania with layers upon layers of ash, which in turn rendered the land dark, rich and fertile beyond all measure. But for a long time now it had stood quiescent. Its inner fires had fallen silent. Its slopes had become verdant, covered in dense forest. And at its base, carving a path through all that fertile richness, the Sarno River flowed with unwavering steadiness toward the sea. Into this pristine landscape, sometime in the 8th century BC, came the Oscans. They were an Italic tribe of farmers and herders who had descended from the surrounding highlands. Their choice of settlement was a low plateau, a natural promontory formed from an ancient lava flow that had cooled and solidified into a defensible rise above the plain, strategically overlooking the river on its final journey to the coast. The mountain was their provider, giving them everything they needed. Its forests supplied timber for their dwellings, and the hardened volcanic earth beneath their feet offered a firm foundation for the weight of walls and hearths. But it was the soil that truly made this land a treasure. The volcanic earth yielded harvests of a quality unknown anywhere else in the vicinity. The olive trees they cultivated grew robust and became heavy with fruit, producing oil in great abundance. The grapevines they planted flourished, yielding a dark, potent wine. They established their homes in 5 small, distinct villages, which were simple clusters of huts made from wood and stone. In the Oscan language, the word for 5 was Pampa, and so the place eventually became known as Pompeii, a name that, at its very essence, simply meant the 5. For generations, the world of these Oscan people was defined by the mountain on one side and the bay on the other. Their existence was intrinsically tied to the soil, to what the land could provide. But the sea was a great highway, and it was on the verge of bringing a completely new world to their doorstep. Around the year 740 BC, a profound and irreversible change arrived in the region of Campania. Just across the bay, a new power established a foothold with the foundation of Cumae, the very first Greek city on the Italian mainland. These newcomers were a fundamentally different kind of people. They were not pastoralists from the hills, they were mariners and merchants, daring adventurers from a more ancient and sophisticated civilization. And they perceived the world not as a patchwork of agricultural fields, but as an interconnected network of ports. For them, the mouth of the Sarno River represented a perfect gateway. It was a calm, sheltered harbor that offered direct access into the fertile heartland of Campania. The Greeks arrived in search of the raw bounty of the land. The timber from the mountain's forests, which was essential for building their ships, and the surplus grain from the fields. In exchange, they brought the products of a more refined and cosmopolitan world. For the very first time, the inhabitants of Pompeii laid eyes on fine pottery, intricately painted with scenes depicting gods and heroes, offering a window into a universe of mythology they had never known. They handled elegant bronze vessels and tasted the smoother, more delicate flavors of Greek wine and olive oil. But this trade brought more than just material goods. Carried with it ideas, a different way of perceiving and interacting with the world. Oscan craftsmen, who for generations had fashioned simple, functional pots, now began to study the elegant forms and painted motifs of the Greeks, gradually blending these foreign aesthetics with their own local traditions. Leaders who had traditionally ruled through physical strength and established custom began to witness another form of power, one that was rooted in wealth and commerce. It marked the beginning of a cultural fusion, a slow and inexorable blending of two distinct worlds. The most potent symbol of this new and powerful influence appeared in the 6th century BC. On a prominent bluff of land that overlooked the bay, a great temple was erected. This was no simple, open-air shrine dedicated to local nature spirits. It was a grand Doric temple, constructed in the pure, unadulterated Greek style. The temple stood as a bold declaration. This humble Oscan settlement now perceived itself as a component of a wider Mediterranean world, a critical meeting point between the agrarian Italic interior and the dynamic, seafaring civilization of the Greeks. As the Greek presence began to solidify along the coastline, a new power started to press down from the north. This was a formidable and enigmatic civilization known as the Etruscans. They were master engineers, sophisticated artists, and disciplined warriors, and they were poised to achieve dominance over much of the Italian peninsula. Drawn southward by the legendary fertility of Campania, they expanded their territory, establishing a major stronghold at the city of Capua. From that central point, their influence radiated outward, and the small port of Pompeii was inevitably drawn into their sphere of control. This was not a violent conquest, but rather a political and economic alignment. The Etruscans were brilliant organizers, and under their dominion, the agricultural potential of the entire region was maximized. Trade flowing along the Sarno River became more regular and highly profitable. The town's prosperity swelled, and with it, its strategic importance. To safeguard the flourishing town and its accumulating wealth, Pompeii initiated the construction of its first true city walls. This was a formidable barrier built from large blocks of tufa, a soft, easily workable volcanic stone. They were designed with remarkable foresight. The defensive enclosure encompassed not only the town's core of homes and workshops but also a broad expanse of the surrounding farmland. This ensured that, in the event of a siege, Pompeii's inhabitants would possess a secure supply of food contained safely within their defenses. Capua's dominance brought a degree of uniformity to the region. Its artisans, its architectural styles, and its extensive trade networks all shaped the dependent towns that surrounded it. But Etruscan ambition was not satisfied with just the rich inland plains. They sought complete control over the entire bay, a strategic goal that brought them into direct and unavoidable conflict with the Greeks. Their expansion was first checked in 524 BC, when a major land assault on the Greek city of Cumae was successfully repelled. For the next half-century, a tense balance of power held. Then, in 474 BC, the Etruscans struck once more. They launched their fleet against Cumae and were met with utter disaster. The great naval battle concluded in their complete and total defeat. With their sea power irrevocably broken, their hold on Campania collapsed. The Etruscan presence gradually faded from Pompeii, leaving behind only faint traces of their orderly influence in the city's walls and domestic structures. With their departure, the long and arduous struggle for control of the region was finally over, and a heavy stillness descended upon Pompeii. The stable economic system that had connected it to the wider Mediterranean world was shattered. The trading ships that had once frequently crowded the river's mouth became a rare and infrequent sight. Inland roads fell silent as merchants, wary of the now unstable countryside, opted for safer, more predictable routes. Pompeii was slowly becoming a place of stagnation, a provincial town overshadowed by its more powerful and resilient neighbors. This period of decline, however, would not prove to be permanent. From the mountainous interior of Italy, a new and vigorous power was on the rise. The Samnites. They were a fiercely independent, warlike people who shared a common Oscan ancestry with the earliest founders of Pompeii. When Pompeii eventually fell under their control, it was not merely conquered in a sense, it was reborn. Under Samnite administration, the old Italic language was restored to a position of prominence in government, religion, and all aspects of public life. After centuries of pervasive Greek and Etruscan influence, the city's original, ancestral voice returned. A period of stability and order followed. Trade networks were re-established and revived, and Pompeii began to prosper once more. As a people forged in the harsh realities of mountain warfare, the Samnites understood a fundamental truth.
Où elle s'invite danger.
The old tufa walls were no longer deemed sufficient to protect their thriving city. Consequently, the Samnites embarked upon a construction project of immense scale and ambition. They raised two parallel walls constructed from massive blocks of hard Sarno limestone, filling the considerable space between them with a solid core of earth and rubble. The result was not merely a barrier but a formidable rampart, an imposing ring of stone that encircled their world and secured the peace within which Pompeii could truly flourish. Behind the safety of these new defenses, Pompeii's wealth and confidence grew exponentially. The Samnite elite, who were enriched by the agricultural abundance of Campania, began to construct houses on a scale that had never been seen before in the city. Public life, too, became more refined and organized. The Forum, which had once been a simple, open-air marketplace, was meticulously reshaped into an organized and monumental center of civic life. While the city's principal temples were maintained and lavishly embellished, Pompeii now stood as a powerful and prosperous Samnite city, a thriving regional hub. Its identity was a rich and complex tapestry. Its heart was fiercely Oscan. Its culture was colored by the lasting legacies of the Greeks and Etruscans, and its body was now clad in the formidable stone armor of its new rulers. It was a city at the zenith of its power, confident and secure, thoroughly convinced that its destiny lay firmly in its own hands. But as the 4th century BC drew to its conclusion, a new power began to assert its dominance on the Italian peninsula. This was not a loose confederation of tribes, nor was it a chain of independent coastal cities. It was a single, immensely ambitious city-state, a people of soldiers, engineers, and lawmakers from the river plains of central Italy. This was Rome. Its expansion would be unlike anything that had come before it, relentless and all-consuming, as one by one, it subdued and absorbed all of its rivals. For the Samnites, who now ruled Pompeii and the surrounding region, Rome's inexorable expansion represented a direct and existential threat. What followed was a long and brutal struggle, a series of 3 great conflicts that would be known to history as the Samnite Wars. For more than half a century, the hills and valleys of central and southern Italy became a vast and bloody battleground. As a strong and loyal Samnite city, Pompeii was inevitably drawn into this desperate fight for survival. Men marched from its gates to join the Samnite armies, farms were requisitioned to support the war effort, and the people anxiously awaited news from the front lines. Year by year, the news grew steadily worse. The Roman legions, disciplined and relentless, proved to be an unstoppable force. As the war progressed, the fighting drew closer and closer to Campania, and the shadow of Rome fell directly upon Pompeii. Around 310 BC, a Roman fleet landed on the coast near Pompeii and sent raiding parties into the surrounding lands, a brutal demonstration of just how far their power now reached. Although local forces managed to rally and drive the invaders back to their ships, the message was unmistakable. The war was no longer a distant affair. The Roman raid was merely a prelude. Over the ensuing decades, Rome's armies pressed their advantage with unwavering determination. One by one, the Samnite strongholds fell. Their alliances crumbled, their armies were broken, and by 290 BC, the long struggle that had begun in the mountain heartlands had finally reached its bitter end. For Pompeii, the choice that followed was stark. Stand with their defeated Samnite kin and face certain annihilation, or submit and preserve their people at the cost of their independence. Submission was a bitter blow to their pride and heritage, but it was the only viable path to survival. Reluctantly, they chose to yield. Pompeii was not destroyed or plundered. Instead, it was bound to Rome by treaty, becoming a socius, an ally in name but certainly not in power. The arrangement was, in effect, a gilded cage. Pompeii lost the right to conduct its own foreign affairs. Its long-standing ties with other cities and peoples were now dictated by the Roman Senate. Most crucially, it was obligated to provide soldiers for Rome's endless wars. In return, it retained a measure of autonomy. Rome left the city to govern its own internal affairs, allowing life within the walls to continue much as it always had. For the next 2 centuries, Pompeii existed in a state of uneasy peace. Protected by Rome's immense power, the city prospered. Trade revived, wealth flowed in, and its elite adorned the city with new monuments that reflected both their ambition and their civic pride. The first public baths, elegant new temples, and a grand theater that became the centerpiece of cultural life. Yet, beneath this glittering surface of success, a deep resentment began to grow. Generation after generation, Pompeian men were sent to fight and die for Rome, helping to build its vast empire but being consistently denied its ultimate rewards. They were allies without equality, their loyalty and their blood taken for granted. The peace held, but it rested on a fundamental imbalance that could not last forever. In 91 BC, the Roman Senate once again refused to grant the Italian allies the full citizenship they felt they had earned with their blood. The dam of long-simmering resentment finally broke. Across the peninsula, they rose up in a violent, desperate rebellion. It was called the Social War, and it was a conflict that would tear the region apart. Alongside its neighbors in Campania, Pompeii joined the uprising, declaring its freedom from Roman rule. Within the city, the language of the conquerors was defiantly set aside. Oscan, the tongue of their ancestors, was officially restored as the language of law and public life, a clear and deliberate claim to their sovereignty. The Roman response was swift and merciless. This was not a foreign war, it was a rebellion at the very heart of their power, and it had to be crushed without pity. The Republic dispatched one of its most ruthless generals, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, to pacify the rebels in Campania. In the year 89 BC, his legions arrived at the gates of Pompeii. In an act of defiance, the men of the city took up their positions on the great limestone ramparts, ready to defend their home against the very power that had once guaranteed its peace. The assault fell upon Pompeii's northern wall. It was the strongest section of the city's defenses, but also its most vulnerable. While the other sides of the city rose steeply along the lava ridge, the north faced an open plain, the only ground where Sulla could effectively mass his infantry. The defenders knew it was their weak point, which was precisely why they had fortified it so heavily. Sulla knew it too, and he directed his full force there. For weeks, Roman siege engines hurled their massive stones against the walls. The defenders held firm, and the fortification stood strong, bearing the assault with little real damage. But Pompeii's fate no longer rested on the strength of its defenses. It was inextricably bound to the wider rebellion, and that struggle was collapsing all across Campania, as its allied cities fell one by one to the disciplined power of the Roman legions. In the end, the city stood alone, its walls unbreached but its cause utterly lost. There would be no relief, no allies left to fight beside them. The defenders laid down their arms, and the gates were opened. Pompeii did not fight to its complete destruction. Once again, it chose survival. Sulla's legions marched through the gates, and the city that had resisted for so long fell quiet. Its future now lay in the hands of the very man who had brought it to its knees. The legionaries patrolled the streets, but the city's final sentence was not yet delivered. Its conqueror was drawn away by larger conflicts, a vicious civil war in the streets of Rome and a long, arduous campaign in the east. For 9 years, Pompeii lingered in a state of profound uncertainty. The great building projects of the past ceased entirely, and the commerce that had once filled its port dwindled to a trickle. It was a city holding its breath, its fate suspended on the fortunes of a distant general. Lucius Cornelius Sulla eventually returned to Italy, not merely as a conqueror but as its dictator, the undisputed master of the Roman world. In 80 BC, his attention finally turned back to the rebel city that had once defied him. The judgment, when it came, was not destruction but a form of erasure. He decreed that Pompeii be refounded as a Roman colony, granting it a new and imposing title, Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. This was far more than just a name, it was a declaration of absolute ownership. Cornelia honored Sulla's own powerful family clan, a constant reminder of whose power now ruled the city. Veneria was a dedication to the goddess Venus, Sulla's divine patron and the proclaimed source of all his victories. Pompeii now belonged to the Cornelii, and to Venus its old gods and its old masters were officially silenced. This silencing was far from symbolic, it was methodical and comprehensive. Latin, the language of the conquerors, became the sole medium of law, of commerce, and of public ambition. Oscan, which had been reasserted with such pride during the rebellion, did not vanish overnight, but it was driven from the forum. It retreated into the quiet corners of the home, becoming the language of family and of private memory. The next and most devastating blow was the widespread confiscation of property. The great Samnite families who had led the rebellion, whose ancestral homes and fertile vineyards had sustained their power for generations, were stripped of everything they owned. This confiscated property was then used to settle the final debt of Rome's victorious general, the retirement of his soldiers. Around 2,000 of Sulla's most loyal and battle-hardened veterans were settled in Pompeii as the new colonists. These were men who had followed Sulla across Italy and into the east, men who had earned their reward through years of brutal warfare. They were given the best houses within the walls and the richest farmlands outside them. They became, in an instant, the new ruling class, a Roman elite planted directly on top of the defeated native population. For the conquest to be permanent, the still Samnite public face of the city had to be fundamentally changed. The new rulers undertook the monumental task of reshaping Pompeii in stone, ensuring that its very architecture would speak the language of Rome. In the decades that followed, Pompeii became a vast construction site. Each new building was designed to project Roman power, Roman values, and Roman authority. The transformation began in the Forum. For centuries, this had been the center of Samnite public life, a somewhat chaotic open space used for markets and public gatherings. Now, it was to be remade as a showcase of Roman order. On its western flank rose a new basilica, the seat of law and commerce. Beside it, the main temple was rebuilt as a Capitolium, dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the official gods of the Roman state. Together, these buildings proclaimed a new hierarchy of faith and authority, binding Pompeii's citizens to Rome through both law and religion. Alongside these monuments of authority, the Forum's new design also included a revolutionary public space for its citizens. The Forum baths were built, establishing a sophisticated new center for communal well-being and social interaction. This was not just a place for hygiene but a reflection of the Roman way of life itself, where physical care, leisure, and conversation merged into a single, daily rhythm. The new order had asserted its power in Pompeii's civic heart. But to truly forge a lasting community, its leaders knew that law and commerce were not enough. They needed to provide spectacle, a shared experience that could bind the entire populace together. In pursuit of this vision, a great amphitheater was built on the city's edge, one of the very first of its kind in the Roman world. This vast, elliptical arena was designed for the brutal spectacle of gladiatorial combat. Elsewhere in the city, a quieter kind of construction revealed another side of Roman life. Next to the old large theater, a smaller, roofed playhouse, the Odeon, was built. This was a space not for bloody spectacle but for the refined pleasures of music and poetry. It was a symbol that Pompeii was to be a city of both the sword and the lyre, of both brutal power and sophisticated art. The new Pompeii, with its grand public buildings and Roman-style forum, projected an image of perfect order and permanence. But this physical stability proved to be a fragile illusion, as the wider Roman world descended into chaos. Ambitious generals fought one another for power, and for decades, the Italian peninsula was scarred by civil war. For Pompeii, This meant profound uncertainty and fear as armies marched and loyalties constantly shifted. The turmoil finally ended in 31 BC when Julius Caesar's heir, Octavian, emerged victorious at the Battle of Actium. He soon took the name Augustus and brought a long-awaited peace to the Roman world. For a city like Pompeii, the arrival of this new imperial peace, the Pax Romana, felt like the dawn after a long and violent night. The fear of marching armies vanished. The sea lanes grew secure once more, and the trade that formed the city's lifeblood began to flow freely and predictably. Confidence returned, and with it, a new wave of unprecedented prosperity. Pompeii's reputation grew, not just as a center for trade, but as a fashionable resort town for the Roman elite. Wealthy senators and merchants began to build luxurious seaside villas all along the coast, drawn by the region's stunning beauty and its sophisticated Greek heritage. Their presence brought new money, new ideas, and a new level of ambition to the city. This new ambition found its ultimate expression in an engineering feat that was remarkable even by the grand standards of Rome. Around the year 20 BC, work began on a great aqueduct, named the Aqua Augusta in honor of the emperor himself. This concept was revolutionary for its time. This was not an aqueduct designed for a single city but a vast regional network. Stretching for nearly 100 miles, it was the longest aqueduct in the Roman world. Pompeii was just one stop on this great line, but the connection changed everything. For the first time in its history, a constant and reliable supply of clean mountain water was channeled directly into the city's heart. It now gushed from public fountains in the streets, dramatically improving the health and well-being of every citizen. For the very wealthy, the ultimate luxury became possible. A private connection that brought running water directly into their city homes and to the grand villas that dotted the surrounding countryside. At the same time, a great project of modernization transformed the city's streets. Workers systematically paved the old dirt and gravel roads with heavy, hard-wearing blocks of volcanic basalt. They raised high sidewalks to protect pedestrians from the constant traffic of carts and mules, and they placed large stepping stones at intersections, allowing people to cross the street above the flow of rainwater and refuse in the gutters below. This era of renewal also brought significant changes to the spiritual life of the city. To help unify his vast empire, Augustus introduced a new object of devotion, the emperor himself. A temple rose in the forum dedicated not to one of the old Roman gods but to the divine spirit of the living emperor. This practice filtered down into the very heart of the home, where families now added the guardian spirits of Augustus to their household shrines. The widespread stability of the Augustan Peace transformed the vast Roman world into a unified and reliable market. A tremendous surge in production followed, elevating Pompeii from a regional center to a thriving international hub of trade and craftsmanship. The aim was no longer merely to live well, it was to supply an empire. This new ambition reshaped the very landscape. The old patchwork of small family farms was steadily absorbed into larger estates, consolidated under wealthy owners who treated agriculture as a large-scale enterprise. Hillsides were terraced with high-yield vines and olive trees, the region's most profitable crops. At harvest time, production unfolded on a grand industrial scale. The wine and oil were processed, sealed in the familiar two-handled amphory, and stamped with the estate's mark, a guarantee of quality that carried the fame of the slopes of Vesuvius across the entire Mediterranean world. While ships loaded with the region's wine and oil departed regularly, others arrived bearing the raw materials of Roman luxury. Massive blocks of marble from distant quarries for the city's villas and temples, crates of raw metals and glass, fragrant spices and resins from the east, and even wild animals destined for the amphitheater games, all circulating through the city's busy docks. But Pompeii was more than just farmland and a harbor, it was a city of artisans. Its textile makers were renowned for transforming local wool into fine cloth that was traded far beyond the city's borders. Perfume workshops thrived, blending exotic spices with native flowers to create sought-after scented oils. Metalworkers crafted bronze lamps and statues in busy workshops, while potteries produced vessels for every conceivable purpose, from simple cookware to the thousands of amphorae that carried wine and oil across the empire. Meanwhile, Glassblowers met the perfume industry's constant demand for bottles, completing a nearly self-sustaining cycle of production and trade. The city's reputation for fine textiles, however, depended on more than just the skill of its weavers. To prepare the cloth for market, it first had to pass through the fooleries. In these workshops, laborers stamped and scoured the wool, cleansing it of its natural oils before bleaching or dyeing. True to Roman pragmatism, their primary cleaning agent was human urine, collected in public amphorae and valued for the potent ammonia it contained. But it was another, far more pungent trade that created some of the city's most spectacular fortunes. The city became the capital of an immensely profitable industry, transforming the refuse of the fishing catch into garum, the empire's most sought-after condiment. In large workshops lining the port, a foul-smelling alchemy took place. Fish and salt were left to bake under the sun, slowly breaking down into a potent, savory sauce. Producers marked their jars with their names and the quality of the sauce, shipping everything from the cheap slurry destined for the army legions to the refined, amber nectar prized as a luxury by the Roman elite. While these export trades brought immense wealth, a more fundamental commerce was required to keep the working city fed. The daily bread came from bakeries that functioned as combined mills and ovens. They carried out the entire process, from grinding the grain to baking the final loaf. The city also relied heavily on thermopolia. These were essentially hot food counters, serving cooked meals to a populace that largely lived without private kitchens. So numerous were these establishments that they appeared on nearly every corner, forming a vast network of public sustenance for the great population of Pompeii. But a single, brutal foundation supported this entire engine of prosperity: the unending, forced labor of thousands of enslaved men, women, and children. Their coerced labor was an essential and ubiquitous component of every industry, from the agricultural fields to the city docks. The golden age of Pompeii, like the golden age of Rome itself, rested upon a system of profound and unquestioned human exploitation. And yet, within this brutal system, Roman society allowed for a single, complex possibility that shaped its very fabric: manumission, the act of a master freeing a slave. It was a difficult and often elusive path, available to only a select few. A slave might be freed after their master's death as a reward for long and loyal service. Some, especially those with valuable skills, were permitted to earn their own money and could, over many years, save enough to purchase their own liberty. Freedom, when it finally came, was not absolute. A freedman, known as a libertus, remained bound by certain obligations to their former master, and the social stigma of their past would follow them for the rest of their lives. But this slim hope was a constant, driving force within the enslaved population, fueling a deep and persistent ambition for a life beyond bondage. This ambition was a powerful force in Pompeii's economy. While the enslaved provided the raw labor, it was often the freedmen who possessed the sharpest commercial minds. Having risen from nothing, they approached the marketplace with an unparalleled drive and determination, becoming managers of workshops, owners of trading vessels, and brokers of complex international deals. The immense energy that had made Pompeii a household name across the empire did not fade with the death of Augustus. In the decades that followed, the city grew rich, confident, and perhaps a little arrogant. Its people no longer saw themselves as the subjects of a conquered colony but as proud citizens of a commercial powerhouse. Like any city eager to assert its own importance, Pompeii needed a rival, and it found a natural one in the nearby town of Nuceria. In the year 59 AD, this simmering animosity reached its breaking point. A wealthy sponsor staged a magnificent set of gladiatorial games in Pompeii's amphitheater. The event drew enormous crowds, filling the stone seats to their absolute capacity. But the crowd was dangerously divided. Thousands of Pompeians came to cheer on their city, and thousands of Nucerians made the short journey to do the same for theirs. The trouble began not on the sands of the arena but in the stands. It started, as it so often does, with words. Taunts and insults flew back and forth across the seating sections, the passionate shouts of rival fans echoing in the great stone bowl. Soon, the verbal sparring escalated. A thrown piece of fruit, a hurled stone, and the fragile piece shattered. Pockets of brawling erupted throughout the crowd. The spectacle in the arena was entirely forgotten, replaced by a real and chaotic battle unfolding in the stands. The brawl quickly spilled out of the arena's gates and into the surrounding streets, escalating into a full-scale riot. The visiting Nucerians, caught in hostile territory, were overwhelmed. By the time the fighting finally subsided, the ground was littered with the wounded and the dead. For the people of Nuceria, this was more than just a riot, it was a massacre. Grieving and outraged, they sought justice from the only power that could overrule a city like Pompeii. A delegation journeyed to Rome to appeal directly to the Emperor Nero, reporting the killings and demanding severe punishment. The matter was deemed a serious breakdown of public order and a threat to the Roman peace, prompting the Senate to launch a formal investigation. The verdict, when it came, was decisive. Pompey was found guilty of instigating the bloody riot. The sentence handed down by Nero and the Senate was not a fine or a simple reprimand, it was a deep and calculated humiliation. The city was banned from holding any gladiatorial games for a period of 10 years. The sponsor of the fateful games and those individuals found to have encouraged the violence were sent into exile. The amphitheater, the heart of the city's public spectacle, stood silent. Its great arches were empty, while life continued on around it. The forum still filled each morning with the noise of business and argument. The baths still steamed. The temples still received their daily offerings of wine and incense. But the games had been more than mere entertainment, they were the city's defining public ritual, the occasions when all of Pompeii gathered as one, from the wealthiest patron to the humblest spectator. Without them, something essential was missing. The city went on, quieter now, waiting for the emperor's ban to lift, waiting for the day when the roar of the crowd would return to those silent stone arches. On the 5th of February, 62 AD, a roar did return to Pompeii, but it did not come from the amphitheater. It came from deep below the earth. The people were accustomed to the earth's small, incidental movements. Minor tremors were a familiar part of life in the shadow of the great mountain. This one began just like the others, but it did not pass. The tremor grew progressively stronger. The ground began to move in ways the people had never felt before. Not the familiar brief shudder, but a sustained, building force that seemed to have no end. People rushed from their homes out into the streets, but there was nowhere safe. Falling debris rained down from the buildings above, while the ground itself remained terrifyingly unsteady beneath their feet. Then the city began to break. In its very heart, entire sections of the forum collapsed. The basilica's massive columns cracked and tumbled to the ground. The Capitolium and other major temples lay in ruins. Across the city, private homes and workshops suffered equally. Some were reduced to mere rubble, while others remained standing but were dangerously unstable. The Aqua Augusta was severely damaged somewhere along its route. The public fountains went dry, and the city's essential lifeblood stopped flowing. The terror did not end with the main quake. For days afterward, a series of aftershocks continued to shake the city, each new tremor bringing fresh panic and sending more weakened structures crashing to the ground. The survivors remained camped in the open spaces, too afraid to return to their homes, watching as their city continued to crumble around them. When the shaking finally stopped, a ghostly silence settled over Pompeii. Rubble choked its streets. Its grandest buildings stood as shattered skeletons, their interiors open to the sky. People wandered aimlessly through the ruins of their former lives, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. They did not see such catastrophes as random geological events that modern understanding belonged to a distant future. To them, this was a clear act of the gods, a terrible sign that the peace with the heavens had been broken. The immediate terror of the earthquake was soon overshadowed by the monumental task of rebuilding. For the majority of the population, this was a matter of immediate and desperate survival. For the city's traditional elite, however, it was a burden they were free to decline. These were the old, landowning families whose names had governed the city and defined its public values for generations. But their fortunes were not inextricably tied to this one ruined town. Possessing other luxurious villas across Italy, they saw Pompeii as just one of many assets, and a badly damaged one at that. Faced with the long, costly work of reconstruction and the heavy weight of perceived divine judgment, they began to leave. Their departure created a power vacuum that was quickly and eagerly filled by the city's burgeoning commercial class. These were the wealthy freedmen, whose fortunes had been built on the relentless energy of the marketplace. They enjoyed luxury but had never attained the highest levels of social respect. Yet now, with their entire world and all their investments tied to this one city, they were the only ones with both the resources and the will to rebuild it. Where the old aristocracy saw only a ruin to be abandoned, the freedmen saw an unprecedented opportunity. They began buying up the shattered villas for a fraction of their former worth, realizing that prestige, which had always been inherited, could now be purchased directly from the rubble. As these new owners took control, Pompeii's physical and social landscape began a slow but profound transformation. Aristocratic homes were no longer revered as static monuments to the past but were reimagined as dynamic resources for the future. Some were converted into spaces of pure commerce, their private gardens repurposed for industrial bakeries or fooleries, and their grand rooms subdivided into smaller rental units. Others were lavishly restored, filled with vivid new frescoes and ornate decor, as the new elites sought to signal their rising status. Yet, even as they rose in wealth and influence, Roman law imposed a fixed and unassailable boundary. No freedman, regardless of their fortune, could hold public office. That path remained closed, forever marked by the memory of servitude. But their children, if born free, were full Roman citizens, unburdened by their fathers' pasts. This reality gave rise to a new and powerful social strategy. Denied a political legacy of their own, these new elites channeled their ambitions into the next generation. They funded the reconstruction of major civic monuments, not in their own names, but in those of their sons. In doing so, they were not merely rebuilding structures, they were actively renegotiating the city's social contract and their family's place within it. 17 years after the Great Quake, Pompeii was a city shaped by three distinct and parallel recoveries. The most visible recovery was that of the new elite. Along the main thoroughfares, their immense wealth was unmistakable. Workshops and taverns thrived with a renewed energy, their facades gleaming with fresh plaster and vivid paint. The grand homes they had acquired were reborn, now adorned with frescoes in the latest, most fashionable style. Deeper within the city's residential blocks, a second, more modest recovery was well underway. Ordinary families rebuilt their lives with pragmatic resolve, restoring their homes room by room with salvaged bricks and timber. These houses formed a patchwork of old and new, a quiet testament to survival rather than to status. But there were also places that had been left behind. In forgotten corners of the city, abandoned homes stood as hollow shells, and older public buildings continued to crumble from neglect. This selective abandonment was most visible in the Forum itself. While the food market thrived, the Capitolium remained a monumental ruin, a silent admission that the city was far more eager to restore its wealth than its peace with the gods. Water remained a scarce commodity, as the Aqua Augusta, crippled and still under repair, delivered only a fraction of its former flow. Most of the old public baths also remained closed. But in some quarters, the city was already looking beyond immediate repairs. The new central baths were rising on a site where an entire block of homes had been demolished to make way for them. With its vast gymnasium and tall, sunlit chambers, the complex aimed to eclipse every bathhouse that had come before it. Though still just a skeleton of arches and walls, the structure stood as a bold symbol of Pompeii's bright future and the enduring legacy its wealthy patrons were determined to cement. While the physical scars of the earthquake remained clearly visible, the social wounds left by the Riot of 59 AD were now fully healed. The amphitheater had settled back into its natural rhythm, drawing enthusiastic spectators from Pompeii and beyond. The years of shame and silence had faded, replaced by the collective roar of a crowd reclaiming its favorite pastime. Alongside the grand spectacles of the arena, a very different kind of public expression unfolded on the city's walls. Painted slogans promoted political candidates, advertised upcoming games, and celebrated the generosity of their sponsors. Scratched into the plaster around them were more personal expressions. Declarations of love and longing, insults aimed at rivals or local officials, crude jokes exchanged between strangers, and even a form of customer feedback, ranging from outrage over watered-down wine in taverns to glowing praise for services received in a brothel. This ongoing, citywide dialogue revealed a surprisingly literate community, where everyone from the highest magistrate to the humblest citizen felt they had a voice and the right to make it heard. This vibrant human world, so completely consumed with its own daily passions and politics, unfolded in the constant, quiet presence of the mountain. And during these years of rebuilding, it sent warnings. Minor earth tremors occurred with increasing frequency, so common that the people had learned to live with them again. Reports circulated of springs and wells that had flowed for generations suddenly running dry. But no one in Pompeii understood these signs for what they truly were. They saw them not as the precursors to a cataclysm but simply as the unpredictable quirks of a restless landscape. Across the bay from Pompeii, at the major naval base of Misenum, lived a man who had dedicated his life to understanding the natural world. His name was Gaius Plinius Secundus, known to history as Pliny the Elder. As commander of the Roman fleet, his primary duty was to the sea, but his true passion was for the earth, its creatures, and its myriad phenomena. His great work, the Naturalis Historia, was a monumental attempt to catalogue all that was known of the natural world. If any man in the Roman Empire was intellectually equipped to understand the events that were about to unfold, it was him. And yet, he was as blind to the coming danger as everyone else. To Pliny, and to all Romans, the great mountain that dominated the landscape was simply Vesuvius, a peaceful, vine-covered peak. It was a feature of the landscape, not a threat. It had slept for so long that the memory of its last fire had passed from the world of men into the deep realm of geological time. In the year 79 AD, the mountain awoke. Pliny and his nephew were observing the sky when they saw a cloud of a size and shape they had never seen before. It rose from the summit of Vesuvius on a tall, dark trunk and then spread out into a massive canopy, a form the younger Pliny could best compare to a great Mediterranean umbrella pine. For Pliny the Elder, this was a natural phenomenon that demanded immediate investigation. His scientific curiosity was sparked, and he ordered a fast boat to be prepared for a closer look. But just as he was about to depart, a frantic message arrived. It was from a friend, a woman trapped in her seaside villa on the coast directly below the mountain. In that instant, a scientific inquiry became a naval rescue mission. Pliny ordered his entire fleet to be launched, not to fight an enemy, but to evacuate the densely populated coastline that lay directly in the path of the unfolding danger. The great warships pushed out from the harbor at Misenum. As they drew closer to the coast, the mission became an ordeal. A fine gray ash began to cover the decks, soon joined by a hail of lightweight pumice stones. The sea itself was becoming choked with floating volcanic debris, and the shoreline was visibly changing as fire-scorched stones piled up along the beaches. Unable to make a landing, Pliny ordered the fleet to change course and sail down the coast toward the town of Stabii. He landed at the villa of another friend, whom he found in a state of absolute terror. To calm the man, Pliny embraced him and, with a great show of cheerfulness, or at least a masterful imitation of it, he called for a bath and then dined as if he were completely unconcerned. Meanwhile, the prevailing wind carried the vast eruption cloud directly over Pompeii, unleashing a relentless downpour of pumice and ash that plunged the city into a suffocating darkness. The debris fell with such density that it began to accumulate everywhere, filling streets and courtyards and piling up on rooftops. The people were forced to make a terrible choice: shelter in their homes or attempt to flee through a blinding storm of hot, coarse gravel raining from the sky. The volcanic rock was light, but the sheer, accumulating volume of it became a deadly threat. As the layers on the ground deepened, the debris rose against the doors, sealing the exits. Those who had chosen to stay inside now found themselves trapped. They could only listen as the timbers overhead groaned under the immense, ever-increasing strain. Eventually, the structures gave way, and heavy roofs came crashing down upon the families who had trusted their homes to protect them. On the other side of the mountain, a different and far swifter terror unfolded. Late in the night, the great eruption column collapsed under its own weight, sending an avalanche of superheated gas and ash roaring down the western slope. This first pyroclastic surge annihilated the town of Herculaneum. Hundreds of its inhabitants, who, in the desperate hope of being rescued by sea, had fled to the waterfront, were killed instantly. Not long after, a second and still greater surge followed, burying Herculaneum completely. The morning of the second day brought no dawn, only a heavy, oppressive gloom. The ground kept shaking violently, and the villa where Pliny the Elder was staying no longer felt safe. He and his companions tied pillows to their heads to protect themselves from the falling pumice and went down to the shore, but the sea was still far too rough to permit an escape. Around this time, the third surge broke from the eruption column. This one raced directly toward Pompeii and crashed against the city's northern walls. The fourth followed soon after, powerful enough to sweep completely over the city in a deep, scorching wave. All who were still trapped inside, whether huddled in their homes or fighting their way through the darkness, died within seconds. On the shore at Stabii, the air grew thicker with ash and poisonous fumes. Pliny, burdened by a lifelong weakness of the lungs, began to struggle for breath. He called for cold water and laid down to rest, but the relief did not come. When the next advancing surge drove his companions to flight, he could not follow. He collapsed back to the ground and died. At Misenum, the tremors had grown so violent that Pliny the Younger and his mother resolved to leave the town. As they made their way along the road, surrounded by a terrified crowd, they felt the violence closing in with every moment. The water of the bay began to pull away from the shore as if in a great inhalation, leaving sea creatures stranded on the dry sand. Then, a vast black cloud came rolling across the bay like a biblical flood, swallowing the land, the sea, and the horizon. As it reached Misenum, absolute panic swept through the crowd. The darkness was so complete that no one could tell who stood beside them. People shouted desperately for their loved ones, begged for help, and prayed in utter despair. Many believed that there were no gods left, and that the final, eternal night had come upon the world. But the night was not final, and the darkness slowly, gradually lifted. The people of Misenum soon walked back through the settling ash to reclaim their homes and resume their lives. Across the bay, however, no such return was possible. In the space of a single day, Pompeii had passed from a bustling city to a silent tomb. Its houses and temples, its streets and gardens, its centuries of vibrant history, all now lay buried beneath a barren wasteland of rock and ash. While the city of Pompeii vanished from the face of the earth, most of its people did not. The eruption, for all its unimaginable violence, unfolded over the course of many hours. While the steady fall of pumice became a deadly trap for those who lingered, it also gave others precious time to escape. It is now believed that the majority of Pompeii's inhabitants successfully fled in the early hours of the catastrophe, becoming a great wave of refugees spreading out into the surrounding countryside. Those left behind were largely the ones who made the fateful choice to shelter in their homes or who found themselves trapped by circumstance before the final, lethal phase of the eruption began. This sudden flood of refugees created a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. In response, the Emperor Titus traveled to Campania to witness the devastation firsthand and to organize a massive relief effort. His officials surveyed the site and quickly concluded that the city lay buried too deeply and that the task of excavation and rebuilding was simply beyond their means. But this did not mean Pompeii was left to rest in silence. A decision was made to reclaim the city's buried wealth to help fund the resettlement of the survivors. Over the following months, official salvage teams, guided by the still visible tops of walls and columns, tunneled down into the ruins. They focused their efforts on the forum, the temples, and other major public buildings, systematically stripping them of their marble facings, bronze statues, and valuable lead piping. They also dug into the wealthy private homes of those who had perished, breaking open strongboxes to retrieve the fortunes that had been left without owners. It was a slow and dangerous undertaking, and it was the last coordinated effort to make the dead city provide for its living people. As the years passed, the eruption began to fade from living memory into history. But in Rome, the historian Cornelius Tacitus was determined to preserve its story. While compiling his great work, The Histories, he sought a definitive account of the catastrophe and, in particular, of the death of the great scholar Pliny the Elder. A quarter of a century after the event, he turned to his friend, Pliny the Younger. The scholar's nephew, now a distinguished official in the capital, was the one man who could tell the complete story. At the request of Tacitus, Pliny composed 2 detailed letters, creating what would become the only surviving eyewitness account of the eruption. Meanwhile, on the buried landscape of Pompeii, the site was not entirely empty. A small community of survivors with nowhere else to go had returned to live on top of the very ground that had become a tomb. They made their homes in the upper floors of buildings that were still accessible above the thick layer of ash. From within these new living quarters, they could still reach the buried ground floors, turning the rooms beneath them into their cellars. Here, in the darkness, they built simple ovens and mills, providing the bare essentials for their daily survival. It was a crude and precarious settlement, a community of squatters clinging tenaciously to the remnants of a lost city. This fragile existence continued for centuries, persisting even through the slow decline of the Western Roman Empire. But their endurance finally gave way when, in 472 AD, another major eruption of Vesuvius sent a new wave of ash across the region. The mountain delivered the final blow, driving the last inhabitants away and snapping the thin thread that still bound Pompeii to the living world. In the centuries that followed, Pompeii underwent its strangest transformation yet. It became a story without a place. The Western Roman Empire collapsed, and with it, the great administrative networks that had once preserved its memory. Nature reclaimed the landscape. Wild grasses, then shrubs, and finally trees took root in the enriched soil. Eventually, farmers returned, planting new vineyards and olive groves on the fertile slopes of the mound. Pompeii quietly rejoined the productive Campanian countryside. But for more than 1,000 years, the locals knew it only as La Civit, the city, a faint folk memory of a buried life that lay somewhere deep beneath their feet. Meanwhile, in monasteries far away, monks diligently copied the ancient letters of Pliny the Younger, preserving the dramatic account of the eruption. In a strange paradox, the world remembered the cataclysm but had completely forgotten the city. Pompeii existed only as a ghost in an ancient text, its physical body lost to time, waiting for the moment when story and place would finally meet again. The world's first brush with the forgotten city came about blindly and by accident. In the late 16th century, the architect Domenico Fontana was tasked with redirecting the Sarno River, which involved cutting a new underground channel directly through the buried ruins. During the project, his workers stumbled upon ancient walls, some still adorned with painted frescoes. They also uncovered several inscriptions, including a stone bearing the words Decurio Pompes, a direct reference to a Pompeian town councillor. The city had revealed a crucial clue to its own identity, yet the world failed to recognize it. Scholars of the time mistook Pompeii for a reference to the Roman general Pompey the Great, dismissing the site as nothing more than the remnants of a large private villa. Fontana completed his project and reburied the ruins, leaving the city to its slumber for another 150 years. Pompeii's true rediscovery began with a series of events at nearby Herculaneum. In 1709, a local farmer, while digging a well, came upon fragments of ancient stone and marble. The find drew the attention of a French nobleman, Emmanuel Maurice d'Elbeuf, who was building a villa nearby. He arranged for a private excavation that yielded a trove of magnificent statues and ornaments from the city's buried theater. Soon after, these precious artifacts adorned his new residence. A generation later, Charles of Bourbon became the King of Naples, and reports of these earlier finds stirred his royal curiosity. Seeking the immense prestige that comes with a grand collection of classical antiquities, he launched official excavations at Herculaneum in 1738. He entrusted the works to Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre, a Spanish military engineer in his service. Alcubierre approached the site as a mining operation. He drove long, deep tunnels through the hardened volcanic rock with the sole aim of recovering valuable antiquities for the king, paying little or no attention to documentation or preservation. A steady stream of artifacts soon flowed from the dark tunnels to the royal palace at nearby Portici. Lavish frescoes, intricate mosaics, and elegantly carved statues transformed the residence into a showcase of classical grandeur and helped shape the king's image as a great patron of art and learning. But as the years passed, the stream of spectacular discoveries at Herculaneum slowed, and Alcibiades was forced to look elsewhere. Hoping for renewed success, he turned his attention to La Civet, which he believed to be the site of ancient Stabii. The initial digs there, however, proved disappointing from a treasure-hunting perspective, offering few of the riches he had come to expect. Around the same time, Alcibiades' promotion to lieutenant colonel demanded greater attention to his military duties in Naples, prompting him to request an assistant to supervise the expanding excavations. His choice was a Swiss engineer named Carl Jacob Weber, who arrived in 1750 and took charge of the day-to-day work at the seemingly unpromising site of La Civet. Here, away from the deep, destructive tunnels of Herculaneum, Weber found a site that offered a different kind of possibility. Buried under a shallower layer of lighter pumice and ash, it was a city that did not need to be broken into but could be slowly and carefully uncovered. While the primary goal remained the extraction of valuables for the king, Weber brought a scholar's eye to the task. He created the first detailed architectural plans of the ruins, and for the first time, he documented not just the grand public buildings but also the humble shopfronts and common homes of the city. He meticulously recorded the exact location of every object he found, understanding that each individual detail was a part of a larger, interconnected story. Weber's work at La Civet marked a critical turning point, representing the first sustained effort to uncover and record an entire city in the open. It was the quiet birth of a new discipline, a subtle shift from treasure hunting alone to a quest that sought both riches and understanding. The impact of Weber's new approach soon became evident. His open-air excavations revealed what the dark tunnels at Herculaneum never could. A long section of a major street came to light, its houses and shops still standing in silent, orderly rows. Beyond the city walls, the Street of Tombs emerged, lined with ornate funerary monuments. But the definitive discovery came in 1763. While clearing the area around a city gate, his workmen uncovered a formal public inscription carved in stone. Within its text were the clear and unambiguous words, Residentia Publica Pompeianorum, the state of the Pompeians. After 15 years of patient excavation, Weber's methodical approach had not only revealed the physical shape of the city, but had finally restored its true name. As its identity came to light, Pompeii became an international sensation, captivating minds across Europe. At long last, the buried city could be definitively linked to the famous letters of Pliny the Younger, turning a long-forgotten ruin into a place of legend. Campania quickly became a primary destination for cultural pilgrimage. Scaling the summit of Vesuvius and exploring the excavation sites below attracted artists, scholars, and aristocrats on their grand tour. It offered them more than just a glimpse of the ancient world, it allowed them to physically step inside it. The cultural and intellectual capitals of Europe soon felt the impact of this new fascination. The sketches and artifacts brought back by these grand tourists became essential visual references for artists and designers who were seeking to emulate classical antiquity. The Pompeian styles of interior decoration, marked by vivid color palettes, elegant frescoes, and mythological scenes, were meticulously copied in palaces and fashionable homes from London to St. Petersburg. This was the birth of neoclassicism, a powerful movement in art, architecture, and design that would dominate European taste for a generation. All of it inspired by the art uncovered in this once-forgotten city. For more than a century, Pompeii remained the private possession of foreign kings. The promise of careful, systematic study that had begun under Weber faded once more into a practice of plunder. Treasures stripped from the ruins continued to fill royal palaces and serve as prestigious diplomatic gifts for visiting nobility. To each new monarch, Pompeii was a royal quarry, prized not for the knowledge it could yield but for the prestige it conferred. Yet this era of exploitation was nearing its end. By the mid-19th century, a powerful wave of change was sweeping across the Italian peninsula. The fragmented kingdoms and states were being unified into a single nation. In 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was born, sparking a surge of national pride and a renewed commitment to reclaim and preserve the country's immense cultural legacy. Pompeii was no longer viewed as a royal prize, it had become a national symbol, one that called for a new kind of leadership. A fierce patriot and brilliant archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli was soon appointed as the director of the excavations at Pompeii. He was no stranger to the site or its troubled past. Years before, he had spoken out against the rampant corruption and negligence that had long plagued the excavations, demanding reform and accountability. His defiance had cost him his freedom, and he had spent months in prison for his convictions. Yet even there, he refused to abandon his cause. Working from scattered reports and old excavation notes, he compiled a 3-volume history of Pompeian antiquities, a monumental attempt to bring order to the site's fragmented record. Now, under the newly unified Kingdom of Italy, he was finally given the chance to put his vision into practice. Fiorelli immediately transformed the site from a royal quarry into a historical archive by completely reversing the old, destructive methods. He halted the practice of clearing streets and burrowing into houses from the ground up and instead mandated that excavations proceed layer by layer, from the top down. This was a crucial change that preserved the integrity of upper floors and prevented the catastrophic collapse of buildings. To complement this new field technique, Fiorelli applied an equal rigor to cataloging. He divided the entire city into a systematic grid of 9 regions, each with numbered blocks and doorways. This system ensured that not just every sculpture or fresco, but every single artifact of daily life, no matter how humble, received its own precise address and could be studied in the future with a full understanding of its original location and context. During this slow, careful work, Fiorelli's team began to notice something unusual. As they cleared away the layers of hardened ash, they occasionally broke through into hollow cavities. At the base of these voids, human bones were often found. Fiorelli quickly and brilliantly understood what they were seeing. When the victims of the eruption were engulfed by the surges of fine, hot ash, their bodies eventually decomposed, but the hardened ash around them perfectly retained their forms. For 1,800 years, the final, tragic moments of Pompeii's residents had been preserved as empty space. Fiorelli devised a simple but ingenious method to recover them. When a void was found, his team would pour liquid plaster into it. Once the plaster had hardened, the surrounding ash was carefully removed. What emerged was extraordinary. The perfect cast of a human being, captured with haunting and unforgettable clarity. The plaster casts forever transformed Pompeii's public image, presenting it not merely as a source of classical beauty, but as a site of profound and relatable human tragedy. This revolution in archaeology had finally revealed the individual lives behind the ruins. But the very act of excavation that had brought the city back into the light created a tragic paradox. For nearly 2 millennia, Pompeii had been preserved precisely because it was buried. Once exposed to the elements, a second, slower destruction began. The same Campanian sun that had once ripened the local vineyards began to beat down on the ancient frescoes, gradually fading their vibrant colors. Rain seeped into the ancient mortar, weakening the structures from within. In cracks and crevices, plant roots took hold, slowly prying apart walls that had stood for millennia. The 20th century brought new and more immediate dangers. In 1943, during the Second World War, Allied forces, believing the ruins were being used as cover by German troops, dropped more than 150 bombs on the site. The blasts tore through ancient homes and public buildings, destroyed the site's museum, and left the ancient city scarred by modern conflict. In the post-war years, a new and insidious threat emerged. In a nation focused on economic recovery, the monumental and expensive task of preserving Pompeii became a low priority. As time passed, walls collapsed, frescoes faded, and the site deteriorated further in what came to be known as Pompeii's second death. International concern grew, and in 1997, Pompeii was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But it was a shocking event in 2010 that served as the final, desperate wake-up call. After days of heavy rain, an entire building known as the House of the Gladiators simply collapsed into a pile of rubble. The news sparked outrage around the world. It was a clear and humiliating sign that the world was on the verge of losing Pompeii all over again, this time, not to a force of nature but to human negligence. In response, the Italian state, with significant support from the European Union, launched the Great Pompeii Project, a massive, multi-year initiative dedicated to saving the ancient city. It marked a new era, one that brought together archaeologists, engineers, and conservation scientists. Modern technology was deployed to stabilize crumbling walls, restore fading frescoes, and manage the flow of water that was the site's greatest enemy. And even though around a third of the city still lies buried, the focus has now shifted decisively from aggressive new excavation to careful, painstaking conservation. But much of this conservation work still requires targeted digs, and through them, the city continues to reveal its secrets. Perhaps nothing illustrates this better than the long-standing mystery of the eruption's date. Pliny the Younger wrote that it began on August 24th, and for a very long time, no one thought to question him. But as archaeologists worked, they uncovered a puzzle. They found traces of autumn fruits, like pomegranates, that could not have ripened in August. They also found large jars of grape juice that had already been sealed for fermentation, a process that only began after the grape harvest in the fall. Even the victims themselves offered clues. Many were found wearing heavier woolen clothing, which was ill-suited to the intense heat of a Campanian summer. Taken together, these various hints make an August date highly unlikely and point instead to a later, autumn eruption. This simple fact shows that the story of Pompeii is not frozen in time, but is constantly being refined, rewritten, and made richer by every new discovery. Today, Pompeii exists in a state of profound and beautiful contrast. It is a dead city, its life extinguished in a single catastrophic moment. And yet, it is intensely alive, drawing millions of visitors each year into its silent streets, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. It offers an experience that no other place on Earth can. Not just a glimpse of scattered monuments, but the chance to explore the complete, intact fabric of an ancient city, to feel the rhythms of its daily life still etched in stone. The city's ancient heart, the Forum, still opens up as a grand public stage, framed by the haunting remnants of its former power. The basilica's surviving columns still mark the footprint of Roman law and commerce. The ruined Capitolium and the other temples recall the city's shifting loyalties to its gods and to its empire. Behind it, the Forum baths reveal the Roman ideal of communal life. The streets themselves pull you deeper into the city. The paving stones are worn smooth by ancient feet, and deep ruts carved by the wheels of countless carts show the well-trodden paths of ancient commerce. These streets lead through entire neighborhoods, revealing the full social spectrum of the city. Modest homes huddle together, their small, simple rooms speaking of ordinary lives. Nearby, the lavish villas of the new elite open into grand atriums and walled gardens, their walls still glowing with vibrant frescoes that proclaim the wealth and ambition of their owners. The city's pulse feels merely paused in its bakeries, where their stone mills and brick ovens still stand ready to bake the next batch of bread. The Thermopolia, too, seem poised to serve another hot meal to a busy lunchtime crowd. In these streets, Pompeii's entire, complex history can be read in stone. The remnants of the first Greek Doric temple recall the city's initial engagement with the wider Mediterranean world. The massive Samnite city walls still bear the scars left by Sulla's siege engines. And at the city's eastern edge, the amphitheater still seems to echo with the roar of the crowd from the infamous Riot. But it is the plaster casts of the victims that make the past feel inescapably real, collapsing 2,000 years in an instant and confronting every visitor with the raw, undeniable human tragedy of the city's final day. Yet, the full story of that last day reaches far beyond Pompeii's walls. A short journey away, the site of Herculaneum offers a quieter, more intimate, and perhaps even more vivid experience. While Pompeii was crushed by a heavy rain of falling pumice and ash, Herculaneum was filled by superheated mud flows that entombed the entire town in a deep shell of solid rock. As a result, its buildings remained standing to a much greater height, making it feel less like a ruin and more like a recently abandoned town. And unlike Pompeii's sprawling cityscape, Herculaneum's excavated area is far more compact. A dense urban core that can be explored in hours rather than days. Much of the ancient town still lies buried beneath the modern city of Herculano, and its magnificent theater, the site of the very first discoveries, remains accessible only through the original dark tunnels carved in the 18th century, offering a haunting subterranean experience of the site's first treasure hunters. But to see those very treasures, the delicate wonders recovered from these dead cities and the surrounding villas, you must leave the ruins behind. The most intricate mosaics and frescoes, the finest bronze and marble statues, and the intimate objects of daily life now reside in the magnificent National Archaeological Museum of Naples. Yet the main artifact of this entire story, the mountain itself, still looms above everything. An active, sleeping giant in a state of temporary repose. Its slopes, once covered in the lush vineyards that made Pompeii rich, are now home to a sprawling metropolis of towns and villages. More than 3 million people live in the vicinity of the volcano, with over 700,000 in the immediate, high-risk danger zone, making it one of the most densely populated and dangerous volcanic areas on the planet. Scientists monitor the mountain constantly, tracking the slightest tremor, the smallest change in the gases that rise from its crater. They believe that Vesuvius is overdue for another major eruption, an event that, despite modern evacuation plans, could be catastrophic. But life here continues, just as vibrant and chaotic as it was 2,000 years ago. The millions who live around the modern bay do so not because they have forgotten the past, but because this is their home, and roots often run deeper than fear. In the end, Pompeii is more than just a tragedy preserved in ash. It is a lasting testament to the stubborn, resilient human impulse to build, to thrive, and to live fully, even on ground that they know deep down can one day betray them.